So this episode is an interview with the CEO of really one of the most incredible, one of the most amazing companies in the world. It is, in my opinion, and probably even by objective standards, one of the greatest examples of a business operating under the guise of conscious capitalism, where you're profit motivated, but yet at the same time, your products or your services or whatever it is that you create also creates this amazing social upside. The person that I'm speaking to is Michael Joos. He's a South African and he's also a Swiss citizen. That's where their headquarters of Vestergaard is these days. He's got a storied history working for over 25 years with medtech and biotech and has really just an amazing wealth of knowledge, but also huge ambitions for Vestergaard's future product lines. There are pretty much three sort of chapters to this conversation. First, we introduce Vestergaard, a little bit of the history of it, what their products are, but then we talk about the conscious capitalism business model or just conscious capitalism more generally. But then finally, and really the best part of the conversation is really where we get into the swing of things, about 30 minutes and on, is when Michael tells me and tells us, I suppose, a little bit about what the future ambitions are for Vestergaard. So what the amazing products that they want to create are going forward and what the complexities are in all of this, what the opportunities in all of this, and the wonderful tangents that can sort of take us down. All right, so that's it. And obviously I'm not going to read any ads or anything like that, but if you could just do one thing for me, which is very important, is that if you could just subscribe to this podcast. So take up your phone, flick up into the app and just subscribe, because obviously not every episode is going to be for you, but if you're subscribed, then at least they will come across your eyes and you'll be able to tell whether you're interested or not. I also run two other podcasts, the Inserto and Nassim Taleb podcast. So if you're interested in the ideas of the Inserto or Nassim Taleb, subscribe to that, and it's kind of a crash course into his ideas. And then of course there's also the Geopolitics and Power podcast, which is just very new, just released only last week, and all that's going to be found in the description. So subscribe to this podcast, have a look at the others if you're interested. This is an amazing conversation with an amazing man working for an amazing company. I really hope you like it. So I'm here with Michael Joos, the CEO of Vestergaard, this absolutely amazing company that we're going to delve in today. Thanks for joining me, Michael. Very nice of you to spare some time. I'm sure you have a really, really full calendar.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
I thought the best way to introduce Vestergaard as a snapshot would to be just highlight some of the high level social good that the products create. Okay, so the Life Straw has so far given 55 million people the chance to drink fresh water. The Permanet, which is really the backbone of the company and its legacy, has protected more than 1.6 billion lives from malaria. And then finally, the Zero Fly Sacks has saved $16.5 million in losses from contaminations that happened in harvesting. So as a high level, the products are creating amazing social good. And Michael, what do you want to comment about to introduce Vestergaard from there?
So you've given the main statistics of the company already. Thank you for that. Really, Vestergaard is, at the end of the day, what we refer to as a humanitarian entrepreneurship company. And so, in essence, we believe there is no conflict between doing good as well as making profit at the same time. So doing good is indeed good business, the way we see it. And maybe an easy way to understand this often is, most companies have this thing called the CSR report, corporate social responsibility report. Well, that's kind of our business plan. So right. Instead of just having a report CSR, that is the full essence and the purpose of the company at the end of the day. The company is it's a family-owned company in its third generation, and I am the first non-family CEO running the company. And really, the company as it stands today, the company was founded, Vestergaard was founded in 1957 already, so it has quite a long history. But in its current incarnation, the company was really built by the current owner, which is Mikkel Vestergaard, who is that third generation. And so for the last 20 years, he's really put much of this that we're going to talk about today in place, right?
Yep.
And I think what's important to note about Vestergaard is that it has now had multiple success stories, as you point out, in this humanitarian entrepreneurship business model. So we really believe in it, and we believe that we can take this business model and apply it again and again and again in other areas. And you mentioned a life straw specifically. That is a product category which has now been spun out. So it is now a fully separate company with its own leadership, still reporting into the same structure as us. But it really was incubated within Vestergaard and within the Vestergaard business model. And so initially it was a collaboration with the Carter Foundation, where we're looking towards eliminating guinea worm as one of the diseases which plagued millions of people really over the history of that disease and for the last decades also. And a filter was developed that allowed safe, clean drinking water from any source, quite frankly, and filter out not just bacteria, but also viruses to a certain extent and so on. And then that product was being hugely successful in terms of guinea worm eradication. It played a major contribution. And from multiple million cases last year, I believe there were around 53 cases in the whole world. So that is getting close to eradication. Now, where the business model comes in is that LifeStraw found an application really in the outdoors camper market space and became a brand in that market all around the world, a leading brand in water filtration in that outdoor retail space. And the business model is such that when you buy a LifeStraw, it guarantees one child in sub-Saharan Africa access to clean drinking water. And the way they do it is quite fascinating in that they have these big water filtration systems that they bring to schools in the Kenya, Kakamega region and elsewhere. And in the meantime, it's been multiple thousands of schools essentially, and they teach the kids all about safe drinking water and using these systems, and have been able to, I believe it's up to 3.3 million kids have received up to 1 year of free and safe, clean drinking water as a result. So that particular business model is you buy a product and then you part of the impact you get for buying that product is then this social good or impact elsewhere to somebody who needs it. Public health, this is really the Vestergaard core business today, and it is an amazing success story on its own. Malaria has been around, humankind since millennia, really, and people forget that malaria was in Europe and in most of Europe, North America, close to our homes, as recent as 100 years ago.
Yeah, that's such a crazy fact, isn't it? Totally unaware of that, yeah.
Absolutely. And so the world is now looking to really get rid of this scourge everywhere. And, it's kind of whittled down to sub-Saharan Africa, some pockets in India, some pockets in Southeast Asia, where malaria is still a big problem. And in the early kind of 2000s, it was very clear that bed nets, the humble bed net, a net you put over a bed to simply have a mechanical barrier between you and the mosquito, is quite an effective tool here. But the old business models of trying to sell these bed nets to poor rural communities who really didn't have the money to afford them, or who made, who made other purchase decisions which happened to be more of an acute need in their lives at that point in time. This didn't really work, the old kind of retail model. And so thanks to amazing effort from very big organizations such as the Global Fund, the WHO, President's Malaria Initiative and so on, who understood this and realized that really the way to go after this this problem was with these mass campaigns, where they put billions of dollars and really went into these areas and made sure that there was a good coverage of these nets to get, a term we all very much familiar with these days in the era of COVID, is that herd immunity, right? In this case, it would be that herd protection. So you really need about 70% coverage of a community with malaria nets that have insecticide on them to protect enough people in the community to get that herd protection, right? The two elements. So you're protecting the sleepers with the mechanical barriers, but you're also killing insects all the time, right, in that community as well. And that reduces the population of the insects around at the same time. And of course, the insect here is the vector, right? It's the one that takes the disease from one place to another, from one human to another, spreading the parasite. So thanks to this initiative, Vestergaard was really the company that understood through its history both polymer science and textiles, and was one of the companies that was well positioned to bring new technologies into the space, and has then over time delivered, and the stats are on the website, over 800 million of these bed nets, protected 1.6 billion people and so on over the duration. And the bed net is whether it's the Lancet Commission, Cochrane reviews and so on, there's a very clear correlation or cause and effect correlation between use of bed nets and reducing malaria incident rates and death rates. And the humble bed net is actually credited with 70% of the reduction of malaria incident rates and deaths.
Yeah. I just want to interrupt you 1 second and emphasize that point you just made, that you've produced over 800 million of these nets. And I want that to stand for a second to sort of highlight the huge role Vestergaard is playing in this problem. If any other company produced 800 million units of a product and managed to sell it, then they're an S&P absolute success story, assuming all the economics are right. But the scale, 800 million products, which then have to be delivered into Africa, which probably has the worst logistics in the world to deliver things into. It is just astounding and so amazing. So I don't want that point to just go overlooked there. I want that to stand.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I mean, there are 6,000 people making these for us. 60,000 tons of material get shipped around every year in both raw materials and finished goods. So it is quite a massive operation at the end of the day.
Yeah. So you started off by saying most companies would have their sort of CSR portfolio. And this is something I definitely want to touch on later, but I just want to say it now so we don't forget. I would love for you to speak later a little bit about greenwashing, this phenomenon of companies pretending to give a crap about the social good just so they can give the green tick of approval and keep all the people that are shouting their voices down. But let's talk about the moment that Vestergaard went from purely a textile company when they shifted into using their resources to hit the social good and to go from making clothes to say, look, we've got all this brilliant infrastructure. We've got all of this human capital and intellectual capital. Let's do something good with it. So what did that shift look like?
Yeah, and it's probably an entrepreneurial story in many ways, in that, so the old Vestergaard was really one that was a supplier to humanitarian emergencies. And so ability to supply blankets and all kinds of materials you need for humanitarian emergencies. Of course, that business model is a little bit up and down, right? It requires emergencies to happen, which inconveniently may not come as often as you like them from a business perspective.
Not good for cash flow.
Right, exactly. And so when I think a lot of this was also thanks to the AIDS movement. One of our directors was the head of UNAIDS, and they, of course, in the late 20th century, were really drivers of what do you do with public health, across the world, using all these big multinational organizations. How do you fund a cohesive strategy, a public health strategy? How do you point that public health strategy at a place that doesn't have money, like Africa, as an example, or many places in Africa? And you do that because you want to make sure that epidemic or pandemic, whatever it is, doesn't come back at you, right? At the end of the day. So there is a humanitarian element to it. There is maybe a diplomacy aspect to it also, but there is also a simple case that if you don't deal with it where the origin of the outbreak is, you might have it in your backyard. There's a selfishness element to it as well. And so I think the malaria community then learned a trick from the HIV community and said, okay, we got to really hit this big and hard. And I think it's at that time that, and this also maybe illustrates in how well a Vestergaard fits into this whole scheme, right? So you have the big multilateral organizations such as the WHO. You have these massive funds like the Global Fund and President's Malaria Initiative and PEPFAR and so on. And they, of course, get funded with billions of dollars, which usually come from taxpayers' money, right? And I call it recycled profit, just to make people understand sometimes that this isn't money that comes from nowhere. This is actually generated by a business activity somewhere else, and it was taxed. And so, and really to do something like malaria intervention, you need all three. You need the big multilateral institutions like WHO. You need the big funds like the Global Fund, and you need, in our opinion, also the entrepreneurs, the for-profit entrepreneurs. It's really a triangle or tripod or tripartite alliance, rather, if you want to put it that way. You need the WHO to kind of have a consistent approach. What is the problem? Define the problem, regulate the problem, so that you don't need to interact with hundreds of different regulatory environments. As an example, WHO does an enormous public good there. We shoot at the WHO sometimes because we think they're inefficient and so on, but actually they've summarized, much like the European Union did, right, in some way, but they've summarized 100 different regulatory systems down into one when it comes to some of these public health initiatives, such as regulatory for a bed net. And a bed net has agri-chemicals on it, so it has toxins on it, right? Has toxic chemicals on. You need the global funds of the world to bring big pocketbooks, really big money, to do stuff that just no entrepreneur would do, really.
Right.
Multiple billions of dollars. But then you also need, and that gives you the reach, it gives you the ability to do these grand schemes of really going to a community level protection and so on. But then you also need the entrepreneurs to come in and to really have that profit motive to provide the technology, on the ones, and to bring the efficiency to the game as well, right? And then there's a place for NGOs as well, etc. In all of that. And so for us, we knew right up front that there was an opportunity for a business to come in, provide better products that were on the market available at the time, better agrochemicals, better polymer science, and really go after these issues from a scientific and entrepreneurial perspective, right? And that's what Vestergaard really did. It took advantage of that opportunity, combined its polymer science and all these things, and created these amazing products.
Yeah. Talk about the specific moment when I believe it was Mikkel, the third generation of the Vestergaard. So he was a man that came into Africa with all these resources, the CEO of a big textile company, and saw the problem. Talk about his, what happened within him that moved from, we're going to be a profit-seeking clothing company, to we're going to be a profit-seeking and social upside company in Africa. You know, I know it wasn't yourself, so you're not speaking from firsthand experience,
Yeah,
but I just imagine that's kind of like folklore around the company, the fact that this transition happened.
I think the folklore in the company is really the step right beyond that. Okay, so that step was kind of a no-brainer, and it was an opportunity, right company, right skills, right time, right leader, and all these sort of things. But it's really the following 15 years that then defined who Vestergaard is today, and that has a lot to do with Mikkel as well. And
Okay.
and
And that's like
essentially,
the business efficiencies that you guys hit on, the fact you delivered a
not
product that
yet.
worked.
Not yet. It's really about the company realized that there was a problem with insecticide resistance. Okay, and that the bed nets that were initially brought out into the market to fight malaria, they had what's called a pyrethroid class agrochemical on it. Now, pyrethroids have been used for generations, for 30, 40, 50 years in Africa already as pesticide control in fields and so on. So the mosquitoes have been exposed to this for quite some time and have adapted, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And so there was this resistance starting of the mosquitoes. They were getting resistant to these pyrethroids. And I think the community was very slow to wake up to this fact.
Mm-hmm.
And it took Vestergaard really to hammer this point home with the global organizations. And this was a very interesting, I think, story in how you work with big organizations, so very bureaucratic on the one hand, etc. And how do you do that? But essentially, insecticide resistance was becoming a problem everywhere in Africa, and the company started to map this and really drive the evidence for this. And it was looking for new agricultural chemicals, active ingredients, as well as polymer science to find a way to deal with this, and created a new product called Permanent 3.0. So Permanent 3.0 is really one of the big success stories of this company, because it really carved out this new product category to go after insecticide resistant mosquitoes, a more expensive product, right? And the grand public health community hates expensive products, right? They resist against them unless absolutely necessary. So it required the company to really build the evidence, and it really pioneered the space, and it really went out on a limb, and it put lots of money on invested tens of millions of dollars. And I think this is where Mikkel comes in, because he had the kind of right mindset and the right entrepreneurial leadership style, and to really, hammer this home and really drive maybe even through the wall with this message, until now it's become the standard, right? So for insecticide resistance, the WHO has provided the guideline for PBO products, they're called, for these products. So it's become a standard of care almost. And so Vestergaard has really helped to establish a standard of care against malaria.
I think that's a good opportunity to shift into like the economics of Vestergaard. So I want to go into conscious capitalism, and you defined it yourself as humanitarian entrepreneurship. Can you explain to us how it is that Vestergaard, who's your customer? Because you're making these nets for the poorest people in Africa, but I'm assuming that they're not sort of paying for this. So how does it work? You just mentioned you put in tens of millions of dollars in R&D before a product was even made. How does the financing work here when your customers aren't actually paying themselves?
Yeah. So the simplest way to put it is that there are many stakeholders here to who we align. We're a B2B environment ultimately. So the regulatory environment is WHO. The funders is taxpayer money that's usually put into big funds. They may have other sources as well, and one well-known one, of course, is UNICEF, right? So UNICEF.
Okay, so it's foreign aid.
Right.
It funds the UNICEF, for example, and then the UNICEF contracts out you to make out to create a product.
Correct. And so we make the product on our own risk. So we don't have projects that are co-financed. That's our own risk that we put on the line, our R&D.
Okay.
We work with some specialist organizations such as IBCC, which is Gates funded, etc.
Yep.
Whose job is also to help with the whole innovation process, and they help to bring the big agrochemical players like BASF and Mitsui and Sumitomo and all these guys to the table, right?
Yeah.
And that's quite an important part here because, you know, it's even a reasonable sized company like ourselves, you know, would find it very hard to explain, to show to the big multinationals that there is a reasonable return of investment here for them, right?
Yeah.
And so this is where Gates has done fantastic work by establishing such organizations like IVCC and so on. But we then also work with the local governmental structures. So the National Malaria Council, which is a political structure, to work with them, to help them to select the right products for their regions, etc., based on insecticide resistance and so on. But the customer ultimately is a UNICEF, for instance. So we would then supply to a UNICEF, and the products would then be logistically provided into Africa. Or India, or in case of in India, we work with the Indian government directly, and then Southeast Asia with different governments as well.
And take UNICEF as one example. Would you have constant pricing with all of the funds that would be buying your product, or does it work like it would in a free market where you are negotiating prices according to what each specific needs are? Because I'm just wondering, what I'm trying to highlight is, what is the difference between the like the demand supply relationship of you manufacturing goods for someone versus what it would be for, say, Apple making iPhones for regular consumers?
I often refer to this world as being on a slightly different planet to the normal world. Okay. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we do work with these massive organizations, and they, of course, do have a lot of purchasing power. We have strategic long-term agreements with most of these players, and the pricing is arranged through the long-term agreement. They're quite aggressive on the pricing side, so they are looking for efficiency. They are not, you're not getting any free passes in this world, that's for sure. They really want to hammer down the prices, and they've done so effectively and maybe sometimes controversially too hard when it comes to RDTs in the HIV world and whatnot. And this creates this a bit conflict between, okay, you want lower prices, that gives us a smaller return of our investment, gives us less opportunity to invest in R&D, etc. And so, yeah, there is a healthy market environment here.
Yeah, and as you're speaking, I imagine it is different for your that relationship's different with all your products as well. So, say for instance, the Zero Fly sacks, and like you're selling those directly to agricultural producers, and therefore it might work more as it would in a regular market.
Right, and so that's really our food security business that has been quite some time in the making, where we've built the technology, these bags, but really there we're looking at a whole ecosystem of how those bags can use, because it's an enabling technology that helps us to really disaggregate a whole supply chain about food security and smallholder farming. And then, of course, in the digital health side, and the digital side is where we are looking at multiple plays, right? Healthcare plays directly with healthcare in Africa and other areas, and of course also digital services towards the public health community, the big organizations.
Yeah. Let's look at.
We have a lot of different, and this. Sorry to cut you there.
No, go.
It's one of the challenges this company has had, as many do, right? I think business is hard enough as it is. Everybody, I think, understands that. Then trying to do a humanitarian good at the same time, where you are trying to figure out, how do I do business and make profit, where people essentially have no disposable income, right? How do I do that? That's another level of challenge on top of that. And then, of course, as we apply the business model, we're trying to figure out, well, where else does it have legs, right? Where else can the business model be applied? So one of the things we've had to do is really put in place let's call it an innovation hub process, or a a process that really pressure tests business models quite early on and says, yeah, which one will run, which one will fly, which one will drown, and then is it scalable, right? And this is where I think, again, the profit motive, aside from an NGO, aside from a big organization such as the Global Fund and so on, who can do a lot of good with the power of their dollars, but it's not a sustainable thing. And what we're looking for is to have that profit motive to provide sustainability and scalability at the end of the day as well.
Yeah. Speaking of the profit motive, that's a good way to segue into the conscious capitalism question. Now, you define yourself and the company, not yourself, the company, as operating along the lines of humanitarian entrepreneurship. I just took a quote from the Conscious Capitalism website, kind of a bit of a definition for them. So I want you to tell me whether you think this aligns with your idea of it or not. So I only took a third of it. They used way too many words to define it. But we believe that business is good because it creates value. It is ethical because it's based on voluntary exchange. It's noble because it can elevate our existence. And it's heroic because it lifts people out of poverty and creates prosperity. Free enterprise capitalism is the most powerful system for social cooperation and human progress ever conceived. It is one of the most compelling ideas we humans have ever had. So how does that align with your idea of humanitarian entrepreneurship, if that's a definition of conscious capitalism? Are they the same?
I mean, I can align with that in many ways, right? I think a lot of what was said there is absolutely right. And even if not, right, capitalism is the worst system we have, save for any other system, right?
Yeah.
And I would say that as long as we count the cost of the externalities, right, and we keep a check on the downside of business and the greediness and all that sort of stuff, where regulation must come in and so on. Yeah.
I wonder, because there isn't like a knife's edge where a business is all of a suddenly creating social upside or it's not. Like, you could definitely make the argument a company like Amazon creates a lot of social upside and they could be a conscious capitalist business. Now, I'm sure a lot of people disagree with that, but you obviously and Vestergaard are clearly creating an enormous social upside. Let's talk for a second about the greenwashing. So the social corporate responsibility wing of a business is intended to be the part of the business that creates the social upside and does the social good and elevates them to be social capitalist companies. Do you see a lot of greenwashing as a CEO running around in these circles?
Sure. There's no doubt, right? And I've sat on panels, et cetera, where we discuss this with big multinationals, et cetera. And more often than not, I sit with people who have corporate social responsibility of some sort, right? And I see the greenwashing, I see the lip service, but on the other side of the coin, I also often say very clearly that that's great, right? You got to have your corporate social responsibility report. That at least keeps a check on. It's an auditing tool, really, at the end of the day, to see what is going on in the company, right? So the greater good that you spoke about earlier on with conscious capital, is that being held in check by not doing bad things, right, at the same time, i.e. the negative externalities, right? And so I think society is putting a lot more pressure on all of us when it comes to environmental impact, when it comes to just having socially responsible supply chains and so on. And this is really an auditing tool that speaks to the external stakeholders that, hey, yeah, we got you, right? We've understood, we've checked that, we've checked ourselves, and here's what we do. And it's okay for a company like us to sit on a high horse and say, yes, we believe we're kind of the ultimate here, because unless it's a sustainable development goal, it's not a business goal for us, right? Sure. Unless it's got something to do with a humanitarian impact, whether that's hunger or health or poverty, we don't go after it. But 99.9% of business isn't that, right? 99.9% business is an opportunity of supply and demand and bringing products and value to people, and there's a limit of what they can do. They're not at the same let's say, level, but a corporate social responsibility report or something like that is a good start. Now, do a lot of them pay lip service and work for being seen to do the right thing in the corporate social responsibility report? Yes, of course, right? And this is hopefully an opportunity in terms of just governance in general, and the trends amongst investor communities, the younger generations, etc., to hold these companies accountable and responsible.
I want to ask you a tough question. If capitalism is the
amoral meeting of demand and supply, and we can usually assume that demand and supply are both acting morally, but it is, as a system, amoral, right? If that's what capitalism is, and a company like Vestergaard, which is creating enormous social upside, their customer is groups like UNICEF and other big global NGOs who rely on tax-funded foreign aid, it's not the true meeting of demand and supply, because the true meeting would be that your final customer, the person sleeping under the permanent, would then pay for it. So I'm asking the tough question that, could that potentially, if you extrapolate that out, mean that to create true social value, it actually cannot rely on a purely capitalist model? Because if demand and supply are working, the people that by definition need the most help also have the least money, and therefore don't make very good customers. Does that make sense? Did I ask that the right way?
Yeah. I think there is a room for a purely capitalist system to generate good, right? So let's take the example of smallholder farmers, right? If you look at the farming revolution around the world, what has spurred on the farming revolution around the world? With the many factors, we can talk about it if you want. A lot of government protection in the first instance, but nevertheless, it was the profit motive of the farmer that got them further up the chain, right? Going out of smallholder farmer to better yields, to better crops, higher value crops, mechanization, irrigation, et cetera, cooperatives, global access to markets, and so on. A lot of it was government assisted financially in the developed world. In Africa, we can use the same profit motive. We can use the same profit desire for an individual smallholder farmer to want to make a decent salary, right?
Yeah.
I'm not talking about some poverty definition of $1.30 a day is the poverty barrier or something like that, because that doesn't get us out of a poverty trap. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about multiple hundreds of dollars, maybe $1,000+ eventually from farming activities.
Yeah.
And we believe that's very much possible. So a profit motive in this case is absolutely possible to potentially, if you have the right model, the right scalable model, and I think that's the key here. Mm-hmm. That the profit motive can be a great motivator to drive this reproducibility and scalability at the end of the day, where you can lift hopefully hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of smallholder farmers out of true poverty, out of the poverty trap, and having sustainable income at the same time. So I don't think there are contradictions in any shape or form. Whilst in the public health sphere, yeah, the needle isn't going to really move unless you put billions of dollars behind it, right? Because it's just too much of risk for a company on its own to take. However, the company can add a lot of efficiency to that model. Right? It can make sure that the tools that are used are better developed and more effective in use and more efficient, a lower cost, and all those sort of things. So it can make that model more efficient. And that's where the free market plays in, and that's where but in terms of a smallholder farmer as an example, or in the event of live straw, with the filters, you can still have a product that's very appealing in the normal sense, and then have a positive impact out of it.
Yeah, I think that's, I think in that answer, it sort of answers my question, but it more speaks to that there are certain industries where it makes more sense that conscious capitalism can actually function without any sort of donations coming from anywhere else. Because, for instance, the Life Straw is an amazing piece of technology that is also like it'd be part of any serious hiker's survival kit, because you can just
Right.
slurp up water through it, and therefore that makes it a very
And it taps in as a product to a fundamental need in all of us, and that is to do some good, right?
yeah.
And it's a vehicle by which somebody that buys a water bottle can do good elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other models like this
Mm-hmm.
around school supplies, for instance,
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
US. And so,
But but it might be true that, say, like with the permanent, for instance, and the market for mosquito nets, that doesn't necessarily work the same way, because maybe there just aren't many alternate uses for a good mosquito net against malaria, right? So if I could, for instance, if myself here in Sweden, you noticed how quickly the sun went down. Like if I myself here had a demand for a permanent, then this could be the offset to the social upside that giving the permanents away in Africa would provide. Something like Tom's shoes, like they make the profit off someone, but then will give a pair of shoes to someone else for free, right? But it still works as a profitable business model, therefore ticking the box of conscious capitalism. Is it true that maybe a market like mosquito nets that actually just might not be achievable, and it needs to be industry specific?
I think with the mosquito net, even though the product is fairly simple, right? You really have to do these massive campaigns, right? You got to really cover lots of communities at the same time. It's a massive logistic undertaking. It's a regulatory, it's a highly regulated market, because you've got, as I said before, you've got these toxic chemicals you're putting onto the product. You got to have safety and safety that goes with it. You got to make sure that when you put these two toxins onto a bed net, that the sleeper underneath is safe from harm, but you're killing effectively, these insects for a 3-year period, right? Outside. So I think it's the kind of product that you can't do half-heartedly. It's the kind of product you couldn't do onesie twosie. It's really the kind of area where you gotta go with a big hammer, right? Essentially. So whether the Life Straw business model would effectively work in malaria, I would question. And this is why we need to constantly find the right business model for the right part. And I think what we believe at the company is there are such business models, but most people don't care to look. Most people don't care to look in Africa or in the rural communities and so on. They don't see the opportunities that are actually there to do good and make money at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And that's, I think that's a good segue to then talk about what the other opportunities are in Africa specifically, but also the rest of the world, because I know this is something that you, as like the new CEO, are really fixating most of your attention towards. And I remember when we spoke last, what got you most excited, what sort of got you the most energy out of you, was talking about this food trading platform. And I can see it's already top of mind, since you immediately went to the small African farmer when you were explaining what the conscious capitalism model, justifying what it might look like. Can we start talking about that? Do you want to sort of explain what Vestergaard's vision is, and who it would specifically be affecting?
Yeah. So, my job here, really multiple jobs, but one of the jobs is to now replicate the serially successful business model again and again and again, right, into different areas. And so one of those areas is digital health, where we have enormous opportunities, where we have, 250 million people sleeping 1.5 billion hours every night under a bed net, and if that isn't the biggest diagnostic disease surveillance tool ever, or if we can't make it that, then shame on us, right? How do we digitize that, and how do we have huge impact in terms of healthcare? And then on the same with the smallholder farmers is another area where you got to be blind not to see the opportunity, business opportunity with smallholder farming in Africa, right? And basically, Africa has more than half of the world's arable land, and it has a crop, it has a crop yield gap to the developed world of 10x, right? So you can, every hectare has a 10x yield growth opportunity with it, and 60% of the population works in some form or other in agriculture, right? So if this isn't the biggest opportunity in terms of economic empowerment and food security at the same time for a company, then I don't know, right? And so this is what we look at, and we say, okay, how do we deal with this? And food security is something that isn't new for the company. It's something the company has worked on for the last 10 plus years. And so, but it isn't yet a division that is really out there, because we're finalizing the model. But in essence, we've checked what all the NGOs are doing in Africa, what they've done well, where's the failings. We've looked at what the literature is telling us from the academics, and we've scouted all the business models out there, so we know who's making money with what business model. In the end, there are 5 factors that drive success of farming anywhere and everywhere, quite frankly. Whether that's historically in Europe or US or anywhere else, it's the same 5 factors, believe it or not, in Africa, right? Like it's not really a surprise.
But what are they?
And those are education. Okay, so knowing how to seed properly, knowing what fertilizer to use is straightforward stuff. It's access to quality inputs, such as fertilizers, such as the right seeds, etc., etc. Simple stuff.
Good infrastructure.
It's access to finance. It's access to affordable finance, more specifically affordable finance, so that you can finance all of this. It is access to risk management tools, and most importantly, off-takers, right? You want to be able to sell this stuff. So you don't want to, a poor farmer isn't going to, even if the loan is available for $500 to buy the right inputs, isn't going to take that risk unless there is an off-taker at the end of the day. And in the Western world, the off-taker was forever and a day the government, right? So it's not for nothing that the Western world had butter mountains and milk lakes and so on, because the government was the guaranteed off-taker. So it's the same 5 factors in Africa at the end of the day. And so we've looked at where the opportunities are. They're really twofold. One is disaggregation of supply chain. There are just too many middlemen, and it's unnecessary. And the second part is really, once you've disaggregated that supply chain, is really working on the markets. The sad fact is that the cash-strapped African farmer, when they have a harvest, they need to sell because they've got cash pressure. And so they sell when supply is high and demand is low, and the price is down in the dollars, right? And this is where our bags come in, for instance, that allows then obviously the grain, for instance, or the harvest to be stored for 6 months and plus, so that you can go back to the market later on and sell when the price is higher. So you're disaggregating the supply chain, and at the same time using the price variation or price cycles throughout the seasons at the same time.
That's a really compelling way to, like, if it was a 1-pager on why you should invest in like food trading programs in Africa, a very compelling way to look at it. I just wanted to add one thing that you missed out on there, that Africa imports more calories than they produce, yet they have half the world's arable land and an enormous demand for nutrition. So it is such a huge opportunity, as you say, and it is quite. I think that really does speak to this conscious capitalism sort of debate, or not debate, but this conscious capitalism idea that you see it as an opportunity, a business opportunity. You don't just see it as an opportunity to help a lot of people, which in its own right has all of the great virtues that goes with that, but it's a business opportunity, because the person who does create the definitive platform that food is traded on in Africa assuming that African yields can go from being 10x gap to on parity, they're going to be enormously profitable.
Yeah, absolutely. And interestingly, more and more capital is being attracted to Africa. So the amount of deals, the amount of serious money deals that are going up and up and up are big. A lot of it in fintech and different areas, agri-tech to a certain extent as well. So I think it's not just us that are seeing this opportunity. There's emerging opportunities. But the calories you've mentioned. I mean, it's not for nothing that the Sustainable Development Goals have zero poverty as the number one goal, right? Because that if you deal with poverty, and this goes back to the conscious capital maybe discussion we had earlier on, if you deal with poverty, you deal with everything else, literally. Okay, everything else goes away. Hunger goes away. Healthcare is improved, not just because of the right nutrition and so on, but
you can afford education,
you name it, right? A lot of these things take care of themselves, which is the other reason why we believe that agricultural growth is just such an amazing opportunity, not just from a business perspective, but just the impact it could have down the line.
And one of the major barriers that I highlighted when we were speaking last was, but who's going to purchase these African goods, right? Because within Africa, the price is X. Outside of Africa, the price is maybe 5X. And I mean, I'm up in Northern Europe right now. It would be really nice to have really fresh, great African produce, whatever it be. But there is so much domestic protection and subsidies over each, especially in Europe, each country's own food manufacturer. How does this affect the demand for a African food if you could manage to, organize it as such? Because you need someone buying it, don't you?
Right. And so I'm not worried about that right now. Yes, eventually, quite frankly, the world should give Africa a break and allow it to compete on equal terms, right? I would imagine, but those are bigger political discussions, right? Farmer subsidies and all these things, and as we know, we deal with them here in Switzerland and in many other. I remember in the early European Union days, early 2000s, the Common Agricultural Policy was one of the major bones of contention. So these subsidies are going to be around. We're not, fooling ourselves to think that we're going to have massive geopolitical influence here. But you've mentioned the calories earlier on. The reason why a lot of these calories come from outside into Africa is because Africa isn't producing the right quality of calorie. Okay. And that's because the whole supply chain is broken to an extent. A smallholder farmer isn't going to invest money into a quality output that can then be used by a processor in Nairobi or somewhere else, making the next level of food, whether it's cereals or flour or processing, etc. And so these guys, they buy these raw materials from outside of Africa. What a shame, right? Because they're not getting the right quality at the right quantity at the right time from the local harvest. So this is an opportunity gap at the end of the day. Africa is perfectly able to grow these calories or to produce these calories locally. And what we need is a formalized system. Just as in Western Europe and elsewhere, you had the cooperatives, you had the agricultural finance banks, you had all kinds of government underwritten insurance schemes, and then the trade barriers you're referring to, and all these things that have kind of secured that environment to let the environment flourish. That doesn't exist to the same extent in Africa. So we need to build the entrepreneurial or commercial equivalent of that. And we believe we can.
And it sounds to me like this project that you're undertaking could be a little bit different from the economics of the permanet, because feasibly you might be able to attract private investment to fund the R&D and then the implementation of this project. Is it true that that's how you're going this route, or is it still the most reliable source of money are the big NGOs?
So it is. I do think that part of the story of Vestergaard in the future will be to attract outside investor money,
Hmm.
and how we would structure that, etc., is currently being thought about, etc., etc. Whether we do that at what level in the kind of group structure we would do so, but absolutely, I think what we're doing right now is we're doing pilots. Right, we're saying, okay, we believe we've got the golden formula. Now we're pressure testing the golden formula on the ground. And so we've started pilots. We're now in the second pilot. Then it'll be a third, then it'll be a fourth. By the time we get to the fourth, by the end of 2022, it's a pilot that would have dealt with 50,000 tons of produce, so a reasonably scaled pilot with multiple thousands of farmers. And so we will have ironed out all the kinks along the way. We believe once that is proven itself, that money is no object. Literally, money will be no object. We believe there's enough social capital out there looking for the right kind of social investment, whether it's a social impact fund or something like that, that will really help to finance this. But we have to prove that it's scalable.
Yeah, this might be my recency bias, but I know that there is a guy, Chamath Palihapitiya, who coincidentally has a fund called Social Capital, who is looking for investments exactly like this. And he's a big, multi-billionaire guy who's trying to put all of his money into either alternative energy or just good social businesses. So, I mean, who knows? Maybe you could one day
we'll be
see money from there.
Him at some stage in the future, right?
Yeah, that'd be amazing. All right, so look, we're talking about Africa now. Africa is a huge place. In fact, it's so big, and this is maybe just a little fun fact for people playing along at home, that it's as much as 3 times the size of the United States by landmass, which, if you look at a map, is not the case. If you look at a map, it's not the case, but that's because our maps are wrong. So Africa is enormous, absolutely enormous. You have 3 distinct different geographies of the continent. You have the Mediterranean, you have a desert, which is in itself the size of the United States, and then you have rainforest, then you have the beautiful plains, savannas. What countries are we talking about specifically? Because I assume that you have specific geographical partnerships, for instance. So could you please tell us what countries you're working with for the permanent, but then also what countries you're thinking of specifically with the food trading program?
Thank you. Yes, it's a big place, over 1 billion people. It's going to grow tremendously, as we all know, from population perspective. 84 countries, I think it is. So it is a massive place. Different languages, East Africa bloc, West Africa bloc. We can block them a little bit if we want to. Multiple different cultures, religions, and so on. We are looking for, depending where we are. One of the interesting things is that we have a lot of growth when it comes to mobile technology in Africa. So Africa skipped over the landline, went to mobile. Much of it was 2G, so SMS based. You couldn't do much with that, but the growth numbers are staggering. And so we're looking for the fertile environment, and one of them is the technology adoption environment, because in both our food security business and the digital health business, we're really bringing whole digital ecosystems into those places. And so the mobile phone is in both of those instances very important, right? So the app that the farmer has, or the app that a person has from a digital health perspective. Now that growth is, we'll have 70-80% households have a smartphone, 3G at least, by 2024, I think it is. So it's not long in the making. And we're looking for areas where we can work and operate pretty well, where we have experience and so on. So obviously Kenya is one of those areas where the company has a huge track record in history. Uganda, right next door, is a great place. And then of course the East Africa, down to Zambia, that area. Also Nigeria being the big areas. Now when it comes to public health, we're also more in Burkina Faso and more west. But yes, it is the big economies. It is the areas where there is also an upstart entrepreneurial environment, et cetera, et cetera. And then we look from there how we grow country by country. The issues are the same, but the regulatory framework, the political framework, all these things are slightly different from country to country, of course.
You're an African yourself.
Yeah.
I wonder what you think about this. It strikes me that there is as much of a difference as there is between, say, Kenya and France, right? Just in terms of education levels, literacy levels, infrastructure levels. So that difference is large. But there is an equally large difference between, say, Kenya and then other African nations, one further step down. So it sounds like you're dealing with the most developed countries outside of South Africa within Africa. Could it be the case that if these countries manage to thrive on the international market, they would be the catalyst that would then bring the countries one step below them up? And is it true that there is that step difference as well? Because I'm just speculating.
Yeah, there is to a certain extent. You've got also highly controlled environments like Egypt, for instance, a fairly big, sophisticated economy, very controlled when it comes to agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have other areas that are a little bit more open to free market, which is where we, want to play, and have more sophisticated organization like grain councils and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So there's multiple pieces, but yes, the basic truth of a smallholder farmer needing an incentive to make money, to empower themselves, needing those 5 factors, etc., is there as well. We will also look at who's successful in those areas. We will also look to partner with people who've got on the ground geographic specific experience. And so we're not looking to necessarily just build this, stamp this out of the ground everywhere. And startups are notoriously, difficult to stamp out of the ground in the first place. And you don't want to do that too often. You certainly want to look for partnerships. So where we geographically maneuver will also have to do with who's successful in what area with
Mm-hmm.
what.
Is it different business functions? Because I'm thinking the food trading platform, and
Right.
I did some research on it as well. It seems like there are a lot that exist already. And just as a side note, I was on the first page and then there was Ivory. I was like, okay, so this is pretty unregulated, it seems. Yes, so you have the food trading platform, which I'm assuming is one business entity, and that is simply there to facilitate all the final crops that come in. But what you're talking about is quite another business entity, and that is meeting the 5 steps of what creates good agriculture. So are you more in there, I don't know, providing the financing, providing the good machinery and education? Is that what Vestergaard's more doing, or are you more developing this platform that's going to eventually facilitate the food, or is it both?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? And the board of directors always reminds us, of course, don't go too far out of your bailiwick, because that's, scary territory, right, for any business.
Yeah.
Where the tie line came in, it was a technology tie line, really. We know how to put insecticides onto fabric.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how these bags were developed, that have hermetic properties as well as insecticidal properties. And so they basically, once you put the grain in it, they kill any insect inside.
Yeah.
And nothing from the outside can get in. And so that was a pure technology tie line. And then the company really ran around like maybe headless chicken for a long time, trying to figure out, okay, where do we apply this product, right? And we've understood that there is no play in coming at it from a single angle. So all those single angles you mentioned, whether it's finance, whether it's off-taking, whether it's inputs or whatever, the plays there are very limited. Really, what is needed is a comprehensive ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this means now we don't just provide the enabling technology that allows us to store a grain product, for instance, without needing a $20 million capital investment in silos and other infrastructure. Okay, that's one of the benefits here, which is why it's partly enabling technology. Also allows us to have a 50 kilogram bag as opposed to truckloads. And now we have all kinds of transport options that are open to us from an efficiency perspective that you wouldn't otherwise have. But a key piece here is data, right? Data science, data management. And this is an area where the company has had to really look at its own resources and really look at building a capability, because as much as we're on the digital health side, we want to move that way. And here, the data itself is the core piece of information that's going to allow you to squeeze these efficiencies out, that allow you to disaggregate, make the profit, and then share the profit back, right, with the farmer, so that the farmer can come up that income curve and be continuously motivated to work with the ecosystem.
It strikes me as not a natural pivot to go from textile manufacturing to, say, tech company and data collection company. How are you managing the sort of switch into areas that might not be historically within your competency? Is there a lot of growth happening at Vestergaard? Are you hiring outside? Like, what's happening there?
Yeah, and the short answer is carefully, right? Because we understand that this is obviously there's a lot of booby traps around, right? When in some way you got to be the ignorant guys from Lausanne who think they can, save world hunger, because maybe otherwise you'd never do it, right? If we all came from Nestle and whatnot. But at the same time, and part of my role is to really bring kind of blue chip company systems and processes into place, so that we can rigorously pressure test these opportunities, really understand how do we crawl before we walk, before we run kind of scenarios, and do it, all profitable, etc. So yes, we are looking at, we are building, these are not new topics. So these topics have been discussed for years and have been invested in for years. So it's not like the company starting afresh. But the pressure testing and the really business modeling and the piloting of these, which is the phase we're in both of these areas, is what needs to be done now.
Something just came to me, and tell me what you think about this question. So as we know, like at the very base, at the beginning of anything is sort of the incentives. What are the incentives doing? Is it's kind of going to predict the way something goes. Now there is a very strong narrative, which I have read a lot about, which is that foreign aid causes more harm than it does good. And if Africa is importing its calories, and I'm a uneducated farmer, or even mildly educated farmer, and I'm getting calories delivered to me, where is my incentive, apart from the obvious for us, which is the virtuous profit cycle? But where is my immediate incentive to say, all right, I'm going to commit to making this crop now, even though everyone I know is getting given food all the time? Who's going to buy my food? So the question is about how much is foreign aid and the supposedly continual import of the calories going to be a major roadblock for this project?
Yeah, it's a great question. I should probably ask one of our board members, Josette Sharon, who was the president of the World Food Program, right? So, as well as CEO of the Asia Society, just being replaced by your Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd.
It was K-Rudd.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, I see it less dramatically, because I'm always looking for the business opportunity, right? I look at it and say, okay, aid money has its role to play, but it certainly isn't the be all and end all, right? Unless and there are times where you just need it, right? So the World Food Program does amazing good, right? And of course, they also interact with smallholder farmers everywhere to try and buy produce so that they can fill the warehouses and so on. But ultimately, that's a limited system when we've seen it's only gotten us so far. Now, it needed NGOs to try and understand what those 5 factors were that I explained to you earlier on. It needed university and grant money to research all of that. It needed to have the initial boots in the ground from an NGO to see how far can I take a farmer in terms of the yield profile. It needed that, and we've learned from it, right? Now it needs business efficiency to take that to the next step, is my opinion. So the two really play hand in hand. The NGOs teach us stuff, and they have their motivation for it. and we learn from it and hopefully can take it to the next level. World Food Program hopefully becomes a client of ours down the line, right? So where we can give them more efficient, maybe better quality and lower cost product, right? So we can give them what they need as well. Security of supply is a big issue always, right? Within those organizations. So yeah, they go hand in hand.
Yeah, they go hand in hand. And I imagine like these things there is just way more complexity than one person can really grapple, which I maybe nihilistically just say, yeah, it's too complex for me to truly try and figure out. But maybe that there is truth to that as well, that it's not so simple as just importing calories means you're stifling people, or by not importing calories, you're also stifling people. There is obviously far more complexity to it than that. I just finished reading a book called 10 Maps That Explain the World. I think that's its title. I'm not too sure. It's by Tim Marshall. He writes in the Africa chapter, it has these glorious beaches, but no natural harbors. It has the most amazing rivers in the world, but you go over a waterfall every couple of kilometers. There are geographical hindrances built into Africa that halt development, right? Make it much harder to interact with the rest of the world. And it's kind of written into them. These are things that are going to affect any sort of small farmer in Africa going forward. Like it's part of the problem. You know, if I'm in Kenya and I need to deliver my goods, it's much cheaper to chuck a bunch onto a big boat that goes slowly down the river and then to a nice natural harbor that can go up to Europe. Whereas I'm imagining like this is part of the problem of Africa. The logistics are terrible. It's you're driving on bad roads for too long that are too inefficient, that the car breaks down, and then you're driving through several countries just to get to a boat, like these sort of things. Is this within your purview of trying to figure out, or is it kind of like this is just part of the complexity that we have to sort of operate through,
Yeah. So, stimulates the intellect, right? These things. And of course, as a student in a South African university, the one course that I was forced to do was called Introduction to Africa, where we had all the freedom fighters, the apartheid freedom fighters, explain to us the history from their perspective. I was forced to do the course, but I loved it. Right at the end of the day, it was probably the biggest education I ever got. In really better understanding. Africa is plagued by history as much as anything else. So the lack of natural harbors, the lack of lock systems, that are common in other areas in Europe, for instance, where we have hills and mountains as well, right, and waterfalls, probably has more to do with the lack of economic investment, which may have more to do with the colonial, neo-colonial stroke corruption eras that we've gone through. As a continent, and is still playing in us. And I tend to not worry too much about that. I look for, okay, where is the opportunity? Because a business opportunity is about doing something better than the next guy, right? That's the business opportunity. And if you can squeeze efficiency out of it, you can make money. And so it's very tactile for me. Yes, roads are bad. Cost of transportation is part of the value chain of how do you get food from the farm to the port, right? And yes, the port fee or the international trade routes are cheaper going from Shanghai to Hong Kong to Rotterdam than what they are going from Kenya or Lagos to wherever. So those are just facts of life at the end of the day, and we work within it. We take them serious to the extent that we don't want to just be little mom and pop shots and little onesie twosies. We want to scale, of course, right? So we look for systematic business opportunities, and so that's why we look for disaggregation of a value chain or something like that in general, as opposed to just in one geographical spot and whatever. So I seem to be evading a lot of your questions in some ways.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I guess the audience will decide whether that's the case or not. But again, you sort of hitting down on the point of the conscious capitalism. It is a profit-seeking venture. Like, it is good business, irrespective of who you help. It's no secret that Africa is. People have been saying this for maybe too long, and maybe even when I'm dead, they'll still be saying it. But Africa really is the kind of future economic hub, or maybe not economic hub, but at least center of a lot of economic activity. If you talk really grand macro, for instance, Nigeria I think, has the fastest growing population in the world. I think. Nigeria.
Possible, but if population growth rate or economically active available population, right? So like in Europe, it was women entering the workforce and so on, that drove a lot of the economically available workforce. So if the economically available workforce grows to the extent that we think it's going to grow in Africa, that's, as we know, one of the biggest GDP drivers, right?
100%. And all of that preamble was just to introduce or ask, what other opportunities are you looking at? Because you touched very briefly on digital health. I mean, that would be very interesting to explore. But before we do explore that, if you just cast your lens out to the world, what are the other grand opportunities that you see that also create social good?
I brought you two already.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at the risk of being accused of being short-sighted, the digital health space and the farming environment is really the two where this company has, although it hasn't yet come out with products and services, has had many years of introspection and review and research and all that sort of stuff. So it is an area where we believe we're kind of able to get our arms around it and move forward. And what else, what better way to do than to really help eliminate poverty through, like I said, 60% of the African population is somehow involved in agriculture. That, by the way, maybe to a slightly lesser extent, is also the case in many Latin American markets, is also the case in Southeast Asian market, not to the same extent, but also. So, for us, really, it's all about, okay, well, if you can let's first focus on Africa and see if we can get it done there, right? But if we did, could we then do it elsewhere?
Yeah, cool. Very exciting. I was going to comment before on whether there was a comparison, but then I was thinking like Vietnam. I mean, they produce loads of rice, loads of coffee, loads of fish. It seems like they kind of got their agriculture infrastructure and business together. As Mexico produces loads of agriculture. I mean, is it true that Africa is sort of uniquely bad at producing their agriculture, even if you compare it to other developing parts of the world?
I think it's the laggard. I think, and this is a wonderful organization called AGRA, which is sponsored by the Gates Foundation, Rockefeller. They keep asking, and this is AGRA, I forget exactly what it stands for, but Africa Growth Revolution or something like that, or Growth Revolution in Africa. And essentially they're asking themselves that question, right? Why has everybody else done it or is in process of doing it? And what's stopping us in Africa, right? So yes, it is a laggard in that environment for many, many reasons. Probably are topics on their own. It is just quickly, sometimes a little bit surprising to me, is just how little big multinational food companies know about their own supply chains, by the way. Okay?
Yeah.
So they may have some, particular projects when it comes to cocoa farmers or when it comes to coffee bean farmers and whatnot, but they very often don't really understand their supply chain and the impacts they have further down in the farmers. So yeah, I mean,
that's a very tempting thread that you're offering for me to pull, Michael. I don't know if you want to, if you're willing to go down into those deep waters, but I mean, you're talking about Nestle, you're talking about Dewey Egberts, these companies, they have.
I am, of course, mentioning no such brand name on your show here, right? But
I mean, I went in a bit of a deep dive to coffee at the end of last year, and it's it's a cartel, like as is cacao farming, as is vanilla farming, and
Sure, and we can go into the whole fair trade thing, for instance. So,
yeah.
example for us is, fair trade. You're asking someone, ultimately the consumer, to pay a premium so that we do better downstream or upstream rather in the supply chain, and give a farmer a decent wage or something like that. And we're saying to ourselves, why do we need to pay a premium for that? We don't need to pay a premium for that. In actual fact, there is so much opportunity in the disaggregation of this value chain that we can just provide more profit to a farmer and give them a bigger income. And that's in our interest because that makes it scalable, right?
Yeah.
So if we don't do that, if we catch it all for yourself, then yeah, you might have a profitable business, but you're not making anything scalable. And so we believe just fair trade, as an example, is something that is unnecessary. Paying a premium is unnecessary for doing good business.
And by putting a product out into the market that is free trade, it almost gives a excuse to other companies to not be fair trade. I mean, are there companies out there who are just openly saying, yeah, we kind of exploit a lot of our supply chain just so we can take a little bit more off the top before we give it to you?
Interesting, you will see that the same company has two versions, right? It's the fair trade and the unfair trade. And wouldn't want to speak too much about that, but we do see opportunities there for sure as a company.
Yeah. Well, that's super interesting thread to go down, which I guess we won't, but I do have a lot of thoughts about that as well. I was speaking to a guy in Mexico in Veracruz. He is really successful guy. He owns a bunch of coffee farms in the area, and the coffee produced in Veracruz is super high quality Arabica. It's really some of the best coffee you can buy. And he's getting pressure at the moment from Nestle, who are going to sort of come in and I don't know exactly the details of it, but he kind of made it out that he can't really do much about it. But the point is Nestle wants to come in and plant their own seeds, which take more from the ground, is less perennial at the cost of being able to reap a much more predictable and efficient and low quality yield. And I'm not sure if any of that's worth saying.
But to close the loop, actually, and what you're just saying now, to close the loop with what the topic we had earlier on the CSR report, it is, I believe, and not picking on any of the brands we've mentioned here, but you've mentioned are that very often they dare to go back into their supply chain only in those areas that end up in the corporate social responsibility report.
Yeah.
Okay? But it is a bit of a classic example of, to an extent, window dressing, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the full bulk of the supply chain has maybe more of a hard supply and demand part to it. And then there is that corporate social responsibility part that gets highlighted where, you have the fair trade all the way to the bottom or a certain percentage of farmers. Good. But then to my point earlier on, that corporate social responsibility report is also a good tool for somebody then to ask the question, okay, how many farmers are we talking about? And how many farmers do you actually buy from for all of your foods? Right. And you'll probably find that it's a smidgen, right? It's only a tiny percentage that end up in the corporate social responsibility report, et cetera.
Yeah.
And how do you drive that across your business? And of course get into the endless debate as to whether we really care in the West or whether we just want the cheapest stuff, right?
Yes, the endless true. There is something very interesting that's happening at the moment, unrelated to this, but the tokenization of commodities markets is being spoken about, and that's this ABAX technology. Eric Townsend's kind of spearheading that. It could be super interesting because the one thing stopping this big company from the one thing enabling them to be able to go into specifically in their product line and fix that because someone broke a story about it, it will make transparent the entire production line. And you can no longer just pick and choose where you're going to fix things. You really have to be involved every step of the way to make sure that the quality of care, the quality of product is meeting the standards that everyone thinks they are meeting. But look,
I think that's a very, and that's what I was referring to when I call it the digital ecosystem. So when we come in and disaggregating this value chain, we are, of course, have a value chain all the way from the smallholder farmer to then eventually, if you want to, to the cereal bar you produce somewhere. And that track traceability without necessarily yet going into things like blockchain and whatnot is already kind of the next step here. And of course, tokenization and those things for us are a little bit, out there as concepts, but all of this thing will come eventually. Right?
Then finally, I have two fun questions for you, but if you could just quickly explain the digital health idea. So it sounds like you have so many people sleeping under your permanents, but how do you collect data from them digitally? How does that work?
Thank you for asking, Ryan. It's really another one of those really amazing intellectual opportunities, challenges and opportunities for us. And of course, I have a healthcare background with medtech that really interests me here. And I think we have one of the most widely available medical devices in the homes of hundreds of millions of people every single day, right? As I said earlier on, 250 million people sleep an average of 1.5 billion sleeping hours under this bed net every single night. And so and then on top of that, it gets replaced every 3 years. So there's a billions bed nets that come out at a rhythm of about five years, more or less, right? 200 million a year, more or less. So this is great opportunity for us to bring, the BedNet 2.0 in here. And how we're going about this is to essentially we're mapping out what diseases are sleeping under these bed nets. What kind of information would we want to have early on to really diagnose, right? With the help maybe of these wonderful AI engines and AI diagnostic engines are being developed all over the place, and so on. So we're seeking this very simple, crude digital connection with the user, with the BedNet user. So now, of course, we have a digital connection with the household, and there's a viral component to that, and then they can invite friends and so on. So we have the power, and we've proven this already in smaller scales, but we have the power to sign up tens of millions of people, right? And so now the question is, okay, now what do we do with that kind of power, right? Nobody wants to be, there needs to be a value exchange between the person who's giving you data and you providing some sort of service. And this is the area that we're scoping out at the moment. It's really trying to understand how do we positively impact healthcare. And just as Africa jumped over the landline and went straight to the mobile phone for obvious reasons, we believe it can jump over the enormous healthcare infrastructure that we have put in place in the Western world, right? A massive proportion of the healthcare infrastructure we've built is about diagnosing and obviously, diagnosing disease pretty late on. All the CTs, the MRs, and that's a part of the world that I come from as well. All of this massive capital equipment is really about very late stage diagnostics. Mm-hmm. And we know that we can diagnose people much earlier with information, with AI, et cetera, and maybe get them to see a community nurse, or first of all, actually pick up the phone and call somebody, right, for telemedical consultation. So that's a big growing area in healthcare in general. It's much cheaper than sending somebody, especially if they don't have the resources, to a clinic. Secondly, a community nurse can go and get higher levels of information and diagnostic information, such as blood pressure, ECGs, and whatnot. And then clinics, and so you instead of not dealing with an issue, waiting for it to become an emergency, and then having to spend a lot of healthcare dollars on it, the idea is do that much earlier by doing diagnosis. And so we know that the top 10 killers in Africa are very different to Europe. They are still malaria. There are things like diarrhea. There are things like obviously TB and so on. And a lot of these have got fairly simple diagnosis behind them, like a simple cough. What kind of a cough is it? How do you go from there and further try and understand, well, what is it the patient has? Do they just have a cold? Do they have COVID? Do they have TB? Do they have something else, right? And so we believe this is another massive gold mine where we as a company want to invest a lot of money, and where we want to put proof of concept in how do we take this amazing, the bed net is almost like a Coca-Cola, like everybody has one, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah. Yeah.
it has that. That's how we reach, and we can reach tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people. Now, how do we drive value? And then, of course, the customer in that case is to some extent the public health people.
Yeah.
Or maybe want to have more efficient data in deploying their resources. So that's our customers. We know them, right? We know how they operate, etc. And to another extent, the local healthcare environment that has, of course, good budgets. And if you bring a cheaper but more effective way to deal with problems, then you have a play there. And there are lots of companies, not lots, but there are some pioneering AI companies that are working in Africa at the moment when it comes to telehealth and so on. And we believe there's a space for us there that we want to.
That's really exciting as well. And it sounds like your big competitive advantage, something that no one else will be able to do, is the access. Because like you said, it's like Coke. It's like, I pick up my permanent, you've got a bag behind you, that access, that ability to outreach and initial sign up is the massive difference between what your product could be and what another product could be that might even be superior, but it would never have gotten into enough hands.
Correct. And then it's, what do we do with it? Do we generate enough value at the end of the day for the end user? Also, of course, we want to do this in a very responsible, ethical way, right? So we don't want to use data and all that stuff.
And I guess what determines whether you do add enough value or not is the quality of the, diagnosis care that you could potentially offer through whatever the mobile application is that's connected to it.
Correct. And that's why we're going to target certain diseases, certain areas first that we know we have a more captured environment, where we know we can really pilot that we can show very specific impact in a disease area, and so on, and then really take it from there. So this is one of these little acorns, where again I believe that we can really jump over, like we jumped over the landline, went to the mobile phone. We can really jump over the need to put this massive healthcare infrastructure in place as we did in the developed world. It's still required, but it will be steered better and maybe more efficient by the help of the digital tools that are being done. And this is, for us, it's about bringing the top technologies that are available, whether it's AI, machine learning, whether it is polymer science, all these things, and apply them in an African context or in a humanitarian area where we can then have both the impact as well as the business model opportunity.
Well, Michael, look, I've only got 2 more questions for you, and they're quite fun questions. So I just want to say before I ask them, what a pleasure and also a privilege it is to get to have so much time from you to ask these sort of questions, because the company that you're leading at the moment is unreal. It's unreal. There is really no better outcome when you and everyone gets to wet their beak, but also help loads of people. It's really amazing. So yeah, I just wanted to say that before, if I forgot later or something. All right. So 2 fun questions. Would you eliminate the mosquito if you could just flick a switch and they all died?
From a cash flow perspective, maybe only in a couple of years' time, but otherwise we'd have to. But yeah, and such switches are being sought, right? So Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation actually, with some intellectual capital that came through Vestergaard as well in that area, are looking at exactly that kind of stuff.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, can you gene switch off, right? A mosquito ultimately.
Okay. Because I just imagine I've heard the question asked before, and it's kind of like, seemingly there's no second, third, fourth order consequences, but as we both know, there clearly would be. How severe would they be is the unknown, and is the unknown worth the trade-off of
That
saving
is
the biggest killer?
that is the question that needs to be looked at. But at the end of the day, we're in the business of eradicating diseases, right? As we said, guinea worm, African sleeping sickness as well to an extent, and malaria. And of course, if you're in the business of eradicating diseases, you're working yourself out of a business model eventually, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So. Malaria is going to be around for quite some time. We know there's going to be a long tail, etc. At zero by 40 is the big goal. Probably more like 50. It will eventually come. So yeah, would I want to switch it off overnight? Yeah, from a humanitarian perspective, yes. Business model would be a little challenging.
Yeah, and finally. This has got nothing to do with what we've been speaking about, but it's kind of a baseline question I want to ask everyone that I'm interviewing. If there were two people in history that you could witness a conversation between, who and why?
Oh my goodness. In history specifically, I'd love to put Rachel
or
Maddow.
life. Yeah.
I'd love to put Rachel Maddow and Donald Trump in one room and lock the doors and force them to talk to each other for an hour and a half and see what comes out.
Michael, again, absolute pleasure. I perhaps actually I should ask you, was there anything else you wanted to talk about before we wrap it up?
No, I think we went all over the place, which is what I really like, by the way, about your podcast as well, that you have this ability to explore, around big topics. No, it's been an absolute pleasure to be invited. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much, sir. Take it easy. Thank you.
All right. Cheers. Bye-bye.
All right.